Hi YouTube and welcome back to Mystic Moon's Astrology. My name is Ashley and today we are speaking a little bit about what it's like when you have the Ascendant squaring to Saturn and the Synastry relating. So Synastry is couples compatibility charts when we take two natal charts and we put them together and we're able to see the linkages between the planets or the points involved. And this can indicate to us some sort of when we're talking about squares, for example, some friction, or it can be trines and sextiles, which are very highly compatible elements within the synastry relating. But when we're talking about squares, we're talking about some tension. And when we're talking about the physicality or the way someone shows up in the world, which is the ascendant or rising sign, in a square to someone's planet Saturn, which is their control and boundaries and fear, what happens here? So let's talk a little bit about it. Saturn may be drawn to the looks, the physical characteristics, and the identity of the ascendant person, but they're pretty quick to judge. Anytime we have squares, we have friction between the planets or the points involved. It can draw us to one another, as this is a difficult aspect and something to work out and work through. And this can provide us quite a bit of self-awareness, and it does help us along our journey when we're able to meet someone who we've got friction with, and we can really enliven some things about ourselves that we weren't able to see before. So the ascendant can see Saturn as a more mature influence along their path. The Saturn person can be higher up the rungs of the ladder. They can be a boss, CEO, a business owner. They can be more mature in the way they do things. They can be a parental figure, a friend that is more mature, has their head on their shoulders. And so Saturn can find themselves in conflict with how the ascendant person shows up to the world and presents themselves. Maybe the ascendant grew up in a different social dynamic or different dynamics, really, upbringing dynamics than the Saturn person. This can also have cultural, religious backgrounds that are different when we're talking about Saturn in a square to the ascendant. So some may say if you have a square to the ascendant, it can provide it offers some repulsion, essentially, to the parties involved. But we know that squares can really be a primal force for attraction. Now, we're not talking about hugely attractive aspects here when we're talking about Saturn. We're talking more about steadiness, reliability, and commitment. And the ascendant person, because they are connected to Saturn, there is some sort of commitment the Saturn person does have to the ascendant. Saturn can be simpering here because the ascendant is unavailable or just out of reach or beyond the controls and the boundaries and the parameters that Saturn's working in. Like I said, these two can come from different upbringings or right now have different lifestyle differences. And so the Saturn person's like, I don't know if I can cross that threshold with the ascendant person because I'm controlled here and this is where things are structured and steady here. But the ascendant person can walk around and, kind of have this prance around wild and free type energy, nana nana boo boo, whereas the Saturn person's kind of sitting there like, shouldn't you be doing this and shouldn't you be doing that? And essentially Saturn has no control over the ascendant, which is difficult for the Saturn person. And it's a hard connection over time for the ascendant because they get tired of tiptoeing around Saturn. And ascendant can feel controlled, careful shaking things up, changing their identity, changing themselves, and they can start holding back big pieces of their lives from the Saturn person. They can choose to not engage as much in social activities or in social media, for example, because they feel the harsh critical judgment coming from the Saturn person. And so, living under this pressure as the ascendant person from Saturn, the ascendant person can feel like they have to show up in a specific way, in a way that's agreeable to the Saturn person. And so ultimately, the ascendant can feel the cold shoulder from Saturn about living their life and doing their things and being themselves. And so they can pull away, get upset, and they can be done with Saturn, especially if these two have no commitment to one another. So, because the ascendant person essentially, with it linking up with Saturn, is looking for reliability, stability, and commitment, and when the ascendant person sees that this is not happening within time with the Saturn person's not coming around. The ascendant person starts to, they may go through their own self-doubt. Am I doing things the right way? Am I presenting myself the right way? And then eventually they say, I'm done with that. I like myself who I am, and I'm whole within myself, and my value and my worth is going to be taken with me when I walk away. So what the ascendant person needs to know in this connection is they don't need to come to a controlling Saturn to look for validation and respect. They need to fill their own glass and their own cup all on their own. And when they do that, they can come to Saturn, and Saturn might be able to loosen the reins a little bit, let go of control, and realize that this ascendant person is going to be exactly who they are, despite any of the fears and hesitancies that Saturn has. And a Saturn person can be more self assured because they can see how the ascendant person's showing up, and they can feel like that's fun, that's free. And so they can kind of get out of their Saturn shell and learn from the ascendant person. But this takes acknowledgement, and it takes us working through it, because this isn't going to be an easy one here. And there is a lot of pressure on the ascendant person to be the ideal. And so, what they can find over time is that it wears down on their self esteem and their self assurance of who they are and their looks. And so they move away from the Saturn person, who's very quick to judge and very quick to assume from them. But these two have a lot to learn from one another if they can get through some of these restrictions that they have. So, this has been a little bit about when the ascendant is squaring to Saturn in a synastry chart. If you resonated with this, comment below or feel free to give me a like. And as I continue on, I'm going to be speaking more about the ascendant squaring Saturn in the future. So, stick with me and take care until then.